Welcome to the training on guidelines for selections and use of accommodations on state assessments. This webinar provides guidance in selecting and using accommodations on the PSSA and Keystone exams. Topics covered in this webinar will include making the transition to online testing and other updates for the 2025-2026 school year, the Accommodations Guidelines Manual, unique accommodations assurances, frequently asked questions, accommodations for English learners, accommodations on other Pennsylvania assessments, and information to contact PDE if you have further questions. Pennsylvania is moving all PSSA and Keystone testing to the online format this spring. When considering accommodations for students, it is important to consider how the online testing format may affect the accessibility of the test for your student. The 2025-2026 Winter Keystone, scheduled for this December and January, will be the last test administration offered in the paper pencil mode. Any student may test in either format without an accommodation during this test administration. The spring 2026 PSSA and Keystone will be online. Only students with an accommodation or other special circumstances may test in the paper pencil mode. Because students may test in either mode for the Winter Keystone, please use the accommodations guidelines specifically for this test administration. For this winter, DRC will still ship paper pencil test booklets to schools that have requested them. Schools will still return paper test booklets to DRC for scoring. As students transition to online testing, it is important to determine if the mode change affects the student's accessibility to the state assessment. In some cases, the student may need an additional accommodation to access the test. In some cases, the student may no longer need an accommodation to access the test. The online training tools allow students to interact with the test platform and embedded test accommodations. These tools can be helpful to IEP teams in determining which testing accommodations a student needs. The tools and tutorials can also be used to prepare the student to use the test platform and help test administrators understand how to set up and assist students with embedded accommodations. Paper pencil testing will only be available for the following students: a student who requires testing in paper pencil mode as an accommodation due to disability, as documented in the IEP or 504 plan, a student who has medical documentation within 2 weeks of the testing window to test in paper pencil mode due to a recent injury or illness, such as a concussion, a student who is prohibited from using online devices per terms of educational placement or documented legal adjudication, and a student who requires a paper braille or paper large print test. Paper pencil testing will be considered a unique accommodation, and an assurance must be submitted for each student that requires the paper pencil mode. When the print-on-demand paper pencil accommodation is chosen in the student management portal, both a PDF link and a student login will be made available to the school assessment coordinator shortly before the assessment window opens. The school assessment coordinator or designee will print the assessment to a secure printer. As with all testing materials, the printed assessment must be stored securely before, in between, and after testing. Within 24 hours after the student has completed the assessment, the school assessment coordinator or designee will transcribe the student's responses into the online test. At least 2 trained transcribers must be in the room while transcription occurs. Once the transcription is submitted, the school assessment coordinator will securely destroy the paper pencil materials. No paper pencil materials will be returned to the test vendor. DRC will still produce and ship large print and paper braille assessments. However, those assessments will also be transcribed into the online test and securely destroyed. They will not be shipped back to DRC. Mixed mode testing allowed schools to send handwritten open-ended responses to DRC to be scored, along with their online selected response test. Because DRC will no longer be receiving physical materials for scoring, the mixed mode accommodation is no longer available. A student that can access the online assessment but must handwrite the open-ended items, as documented in the IEP, should have their written responses transcribed into the online test. Online testing with embedded audio allows students to interact with the test more independently than a student having the test read aloud to them by a test administrator. Embedded audio allows the student to stop, pause, and repeat audio at their own pace. This accommodation can be practiced in the online training tools. If a student accesses this accommodation with headphones, they can test with the general population or in a small group. Because it allows the student to move through the test independently, audio should always be considered over a human reader. If a student has a documented need for a human reader in the IEP or 504, they may have the test read aloud by a test administrator that has read the read aloud and scribing guidelines for operational assessments. However, to ensure the student has the ability to ask the reader to stop, pause, and repeat, this accommodation must now be offered in a one-to-one setting. There should no longer be despiraling of test books or read-alouds to small groups of students. New item samplers will also reflect the move online. When item samplers are released this year, they will appear similar to the online training tools. A pop-up feature will include the keys and metadata for each question. An accompanying PDF will include student samples of open-ended items and comments. Previous item samplers will still be available as PDFs as they currently appear. All items released on item samplers are also available in the assessment builder on the PDE SAS website. In addition to moving online, there are a few other accommodation changes as well. In the past, students using magnification on the online test could utilize the magnification tool, which is a universal feature available to all students. The tool magnifies the test screen to 1.5, 2, 3, or 4 times the original screen. However, the tool only magnifies the item the student is on and does not persist throughout the test. To use this as an accommodation, the student had to choose to magnify on every screen. The magnification tool will still be available to all students. However, starting with the winter Keystone, a magnification accommodation has been added. When selected for the student in the portal, the whole test will be magnified to 2 times the original size. This magnification will persist through the whole test. The magnification tool will still work with the accommodation to further magnify the questions screen by screen. As with all embedded online accommodations, this must be chosen in the student management portal before the test ticket is generated. Both the magnification tool and the magnification accommodation can be tested in the online test training. PDE has also added guidance about smart glasses. Smart glasses, such as Meta glasses, are glasses that include miniature computing devices or cameras, connect to other devices, or integrate with AI. For test security reasons, these glasses are prohibited during state summative testing. However, in some cases, smart glasses may also act as a student's prescription lenses. Students using smart glasses as their prescription lenses should use alternate eyewear during the assessment. The online training tools can also be used to determine if the student needs the vision prescription during testing. If the student does not have alternate prescription lenses and needs the vision prescription to complete the test, the student must be actively monitored in a one-to-one setting to ensure that the student does not access the features of the smart glasses during testing. A unique accommodation assurance is required to be submitted to PDE for this accommodation. As mentioned earlier, as we transition to online testing, there are separate accommodations guidelines for winter Keystone testing and spring and summer testing. Please use the correct manual. The changes to the manual highlighted in this presentation are for spring and summer testing. Please be sure to read the appropriate manual. The guidelines contain information about using accommodations on state assessments, including details about specific accommodations. New this year, we highlighted specific circumstances such as injury, hospitalization, or medical emergencies where students may have to use accommodations. And we also separated universal features that are available to all students from testing accommodations. We also moved information about understanding, selecting, implementing, and evaluating accommodations to the appendices so that you can get to the information about individual accommodation usage faster. Accommodations are split into 3 tables. This is a sample of Table A. This table is a quick overview of all accommodations in alphabetical order. This table gives quick information about documentation, availability in the online test platform, and whether a unique accommodation assurance is required. The links lead to more detail about each accommodation in Table B and Table C. This is a sample from Table B and C. These tables give an in-depth description of each accommodation, including a definition, how to use it, other considerations for using the accommodation type, the documentation required, whether or not it is embedded in the online system, if a unique accommodation assurance is required, how the accommodation is designated in the online portal, and other related accommodations and helpful links. Table B includes designated accommodations, and Table C includes unique accommodations. Universal features no longer need to be marked as accommodations in the student management portal. This includes extended time, reading aloud the directions, and reading aloud a word, phrase, or item at student request, even though these were previously marked as accommodations. This also includes using the magnification tool, which should not be confused with the magnification accommodation discussed previously, and the specific visual graphic aids, math manipulatives, and online tools that are listed in the guidelines and universal features. Designated accommodations require documentation in the student management portal. They may require documentation in the IEP or 504, or local documentation of usage in classroom instruction and assessment, depending on the accommodation. This information can be found in both Table A and B in the guidelines. Assurances for these accommodations should not be submitted to PDE. Unique accommodations are available for students who cannot access the test material in any other way. Using a unique accommodation incorrectly may pose a test security or validity concern. Most unique accommodations require medical documentation or documentation in an IEP or 504. All unique accommodations require the submission of an assurance to PDE, which will be discussed later in this presentation. Unique accommodations can be identified in Tables A and C in the guidelines. The guidelines also include the following appendices: information on the unique accommodations assurance process, the confidentiality agreement that interpreters must sign, sample vignettes to help LEAs make decisions about the full ELA audio and read-aloud accommodations, the multiplication table, which is only available for students who meet the requirements for that accommodation, guidelines for locking down devices when using assistive technology, federal and state laws requiring participation of students with disabilities in state testing, and supplemental tools and resources for selecting, implementing, and evaluating accommodations. The supplemental tools available in previous years are still available in Appendix G, but have been reordered and relabeled to better fit the process.
Next, we will review the Unique Accommodation Assurance process. The purpose of the Unique Accommodation Assurance submission is to assure PDE that the unique accommodation will be carried out according to the accommodations guidelines. This assures test administration fidelity and test security. Please note the required submission is not an approval process. PDE will only reach out to you if there are questions about your submission or if additional information is needed. The steps to submit a required unique accommodation assurance to PDE are as follows. First, the submitter must view this webinar and read the accommodations guidelines prior to submission in order to understand the details of the accommodation and how it's carried out. Secondly, preview the assurance questions in the accommodations guidelines to gather the necessary information. Use the link in the accommodations guidelines to submit the assurance at least 6 weeks before testing begins. Lastly, the submitter will receive a copy of their response upon successful completion. This will come to the submitter's email address. Please ensure the school assessment coordinator keeps a copy on file for their records, as an on-site PDE monitor may ask to see this documentation. Typically, an assurance submission is good for 1 school year. For this year only, as PDE transitions to online testing, please resubmit all unique accommodations for spring testing. There is a new link to submit your unique accommodation assurance to PDE this year. Please be sure to review the form located in the Unique Accommodations Guidelines to prepare the information you will be asked to submit. The new submission link address is located on that form as well. As outlined in the Accommodations Guidelines, a unique accommodation assurance is required for assistive technology devices including AAC, calculator apps, delayed auditory feedback systems, and voice-to-text accommodations, as these often require a separate device to be used. It's important to assure that that second device will be locked down properly according to the guidelines to maintain test security. A unique accommodation assurance is only required for the full audio or full read aloud of ELA, PSSA, or Keystone literature. Note, it's not required for audio of math, science, or writing items, as that level of read aloud is considered a designated feature that does not require an assurance. More details on the levels of read aloud will be addressed later in this presentation. Paper, pencil, or print on demand is considered a unique accommodation, and an assurance must be submitted to PDE for any student requiring this accommodation. Scribing in ELA grades 4 through 8 TDA responses continues to be a unique accommodation. As in the past, scribing for other subjects and grade levels does not warrant an assurance submission. Please note a change for this year. Medical monitoring with a smartphone or device, such as a glucose monitor, will no longer require a unique accommodation submission to PDE. However, it is still considered an accommodation and should be marked in the portal with guidelines followed accordingly. Next, we will review some key concepts on questions PDE often receives on accommodations. Please note this is not a complete list and it does not serve as a replacement for reading the accommodations guidelines. All students, including students with disabilities, must participate in state assessments. A disability does not exempt a student from testing. Accommodations used in state assessment must be used in regular classroom instruction and assessment. IEP team members, school assessment coordinators, and test administrators administering the accommodations must be informed on the process and how to implement the accommodation. Accommodations should always be selected for students on an individual basis, and the usage should be evaluated as part of the IEP process. Remember, more does not always mean better. For students who may be using screen readers as assistive technology, JAWS has been tested for compatibility with the online platform. Other screen readers and assistive devices can be tested with the online training tools. Please note some assistive technology devices may not integrate with the online testing platform. In those cases, a separate device may be needed. If using a separate device, the school must ensure it is locked down properly according to the specifications outlined in the accommodations guidelines. Next, we'll review a relatively new accommodation referred to as the full ELA or literature audio or read aloud. This includes audio enabled for the entire ELA or literature test, including passages and reading questions. The full ELA audio or read aloud are considered unique accommodations intended only for those students who cannot access the test in any other way. This accommodation is meant for a student who is a non-reader, not just simply reading below grade level. It's important to note that the full audio or read aloud of ELA or literature will not be appropriate for every student who receives audio or read aloud of math, science, or the writing items on the ELA PSSA. In order for a student to be eligible for the full audio or read aloud accommodation, the student must have a disability that precludes them from accessing printed text. The accommodation must be documented in the IEP or 504 and evidenced through locally administered diagnostic evaluations. It must be consistently used in classroom instruction and assessment. A student who uses this accommodation must have a documented disability that severely limits or prevents their ability to decode text and derive meaning from text, even when repeated and varied evidence-based interventions and instructions are used. These students typically only access print materials through a screen reader, audio, a human reader, or other accessible materials in the classroom. Please see the accommodations guidelines for full details. Note PDE does highly monitor this unique accommodation submission, as it's not expected to be used with large populations of students. The reference to allowable items are items on the math, science, algebra, and biology tests, as well as the TDA prompt and conventions of standard English items on the ELA PSSA. The audio feature or read aloud for these items is not considered a unique accommodation that warrants submission to PDE. However, it is still considered an intensive intervention and must be documented accordingly. It is not appropriate to turn on the audio feature for all students. Any student may have a word, phrase, or item read aloud at their request on these tests and sections. In this case, the TA will read from the student's screen. Again, full details can be accessed in the accommodations guidelines. Next, we will review some details on scribing. Scribing is only a unique accommodation for the 4th through 8th ELA TDA prompt since it measures writing. A unique accommodation assurance is not required for other tests, but the accommodation and needs should be documented. In addition to regular use for students with disabilities, scribing may be used in emergency cases when a student has a hand or arm injury. It must be administered one-on-one because the student will be dictating their responses to the TA. The TA must follow the guidelines for read aloud, scribing, and transcription. Transcription into the online test must be used when the student has a documented need to handwrite open-ended items, the student has a documented need to test on paper pencil form, including the large print or braille form, the student wrote or keyboarded the response in a language other than English, and a qualified interpreter is translating the response into English. The student used voice-to-text or other assistive technology devices to generate a response. All transcription must be completed by a qualified school assessment coordinator or test administrator. If possible, transcription should occur in the testing room so the student can review their work. If this is not possible, transcription can occur at a later time, but as soon as possible and no longer than 24 hours after the test session has concluded. The test platform is open until 5 p.m. each day of testing. There must be more than one qualified transcriber in the room when transcription is occurring. All transcription must occur by the end of the testing window, which is 5 p.m. on the final day of testing. When transcription is completed, all written responses must be securely destroyed. See the guidelines for read aloud, scribing, and transcription for more information. Voice-to-text, also called talk-to-text or speech-to-text, is not embedded in the online platform. Students requiring voice-to-text will use a separate lockdown device to respond to the open-ended items. Responses are then transcribed into the test platform. A unique accommodation assurance form must be submitted. This slide illustrates the difference between what constitutes a one-on-one testing environment versus a small group. Please note, a small group is now defined as 2 through 12 students. A one-to-one testing environment must be used when a student or TA is verbalizing a response. This includes scribing, assistance with selected response, monitoring a test response, and some assistive technology devices, and voice-to-text. As mentioned, there is no longer a differentiation between 2 through 5 and 6 through 12 small group setups, since there is no more despiraling of test books. A small group is not required, but may be used for students who are using audio with headphones, translation and signing, students with high distractibility or need for frequent breaks. A small group may also be appropriate for students who need planned extra time or other documented needs that would deem a small group appropriate.
In addition to entering accommodations into the student management portal, some accommodations materials need to be ordered in the additional materials ordering system. This includes paper braille books, tactile graphics packets to use with refreshable braille, and large print forms. The additional materials ordering system opens a month before testing. All forms are available in the UAB contracted braille. All subjects grades 3 to 5 and the literature keystone are also translated in UAB uncontracted. All subjects grades 6 to 8 and the algebra and biology keystones are also translated in UAB contracted with Nemeth. Large print Spanish forms and other braille translations are only created by direct request to DRC. For spring testing, those assessments must be requested by November 30th. For accommodations that are embedded in the online test, The school assessment coordinator or designee must enter the accommodation in the student management portal before the test ticket is generated. A code indicating that the accommodation is turned on will be printed on the test ticket. If an accommodation change occurs after test tickets are generated, a new test ticket must be regenerated for the student. There is no way to turn on an embedded accommodation once a student has started the test without deleting the student's progress and having them start over. Therefore, it is very important to double check test tickets and be sure all embedded accommodations have been turned on before testing starts. Embedded accommodations that need to be entered in the student management portal before testing begins include audio, refreshable braille, color chooser, magnification, Spanish, and video sign language. All other accommodations can be added before or after testing, but before the end of the testing window. In addition to accommodations for students with disabilities, accommodations are also available for English learners. English learners are required to take the state summative assessments. The only exception is English learners who are enrolled in a U.S. school for less than 12 cumulative months by the end of the ELA, PSSA, or Literature Keystone testing window. These students are eligible for an exemption from that test only. All EL students who are enrolled in a U.S. school more than 12 months must take the ELA, PSSA, or Literature Keystone. All EL students, regardless of time enrolled in a U.S. school, must take the Math and Science, PSSA, or Algebra 1 or Biology Keystones. These requirements also apply to EL students who are eligible for the PASA. Many of the accommodations in the General Accommodations Guidelines are available for EL students as well. These can be identified by looking at Table A in the guidelines. There are also 4 additional accommodations, especially for EL students. All English learners are allowed to have a word-to-word dictionary and translation sheet on the Math and Science assessments. These may not be used on ELA assessments. All EL students are also allowed to have any non-secure test materials translated by the LEA and printed for them for the assessment. This includes scoring guidelines, formula sheets, and directions. A complete list of eligible materials are in the accommodations guidelines for English learners. English learners in their first 3 cumulative years in the U.S. may also use a qualified interpreter to translate the assessment and to translate and transcribe their responses into English. Additionally, there is a Spanish test available for students who are fluent in Spanish. The Spanish test has also moved online. Each question will appear in Spanish with a pop-up English translation that the student can view. A Spanish print-on-demand paper-pencil form is available for students who are eligible for the print-on-demand test and are eligible for the test in Spanish.
Before the conclusion of this presentation, we will briefly review some key points on other PA assessments. The CDT, or Classroom Diagnostic Tools, is an online assessment designed to provide a student's areas of need and strengths to build upon. The Firefly Benchmark is a new online assessment designed to measure end-of-year grade level learning goals and predict PSSA and Keystone scores. There are online tools training for both of these assessments. Because of the adaptive nature of these tests, some embedded accommodations available on the PSSA or Keystone may not be available for these assessments. Therefore, it's important to use the online training tools to determine accessibility. The PASA DLM is the state summative alternate assessment designed only for those students with the most significant cognitive disabilities who meet all 6 of the state criteria to participate. A link to the PASA eligibility criteria is provided on this slide, as well as a link to the PASA-specific accessibility manual. Please reach out to the contacts on this page if you have questions or need more information. Thank you for your participation in this training.